And we are back on the Build Phase podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Ben. And today I want to talk about Mrs. Butcher's baby boy, Billy Butcher. Now, okay, first off, spoilers. Spoilers for the boys comic, spoiler for the boys show. We do know that The Boys is going to be set in the photographic universe. That was confirmed, and based on the box that the what is it, FPO box, uh, that the cards pictured there are definitely photographic. Now, the card text on the back of the box, like on the cards that are pictured, the location is nonsense. Black Noir is Master Mold's text, and Billy Butcher says something about being able to gain +1 counters based on the number of characters in the KO pile. But at this point, I don't think we can put a lot of stock in any of that stuff. But we can confidently say that The Boys is going to be set within the photographic universe. That said, a reveal article, a spoiler article, was put out on that website that Upper Deck has announced things on a number of times. And they talk about how within The Boys set, the show, the comic, and original art are all going to be incorporated. Now, some people read the sentence as saying, well, the show's based on the comic, but that's not what that article said. Like, that news article literally said that the game will be using art from the comics, from the Prime show, and from original art for it. So exactly what that means, I'm not sure. My guess is that there's some comic book assets that were used in the instruction book or in the artwork or something to that effect, but that the cards themselves are going to have photographic images on them. If this is a mixture of photos and comic book art within the boys set, but it's all set within the photographic universe of Versus, that's going to feel really awkward. I remember in the Fight Club game, Tank Girl was a character that did exactly that, used images from the comic and from the movie, and it felt a little weird artistically. It kind of gave an uneven character to the art within that. Well, there's a lot of things to say about that Fight Club game, but we'll do that another day. So we don't know precisely how much of the boys show and what, if any, of the comic is going to be included in the Versus expansion. So before I get into talking about the show specific stuff that I think we really want to see in a Billy Butcher character, I want to first say thank you to all of my patrons. Of course, the show doesn't happen without support from our fans. If you like what we're doing here, patreon.com/thebuildphase. And I also want to talk about my single favorite moment of Butcher's character within the comic book. So again, I said spoilers at the top, but I'm going to spoil like the climax of the boys comic right now. So if you're not into that, this is the time to fast forward, or perhaps not even listen to this episode at all. So at the end of the boys comic, or near the end of the boys comic rather, Butcher confronts the person who killed his wife, and he uses a crowbar to pry, like, inserts it through the. Okay, also, not only spoilers, but graphic violence warning as well. This is going to be. Normally, I make the podcast all ages. There's going to be some graphic violence discussed in this one, so an additional warning. So at the end of the boys, Butcher has this dude. He sticks his crowbar in the guy's eye socket and pries off the top of the dude's skull. And then he reaches into the guy's now open, exposed brain and grabs a piece of it. And as he's doing it, he says that, given how much damage you've taken, I don't know if you're still with us. I don't know if you're still with it enough to know what's happening, but I hope that you are. And I hope this bit right here, and he grabs a chunk of this dude's brain. I hope this bit is where your memories of killing my Becca, the Butcher's wife, where your memories of killing my wife are stored. And then he crushes the handful of brains in his hand. And that is obviously horrifically violent in a lot of ways, but also there's a justice in that. There is a poetic, he didn't just get revenge. He I mean, obviously we don't know that he targeted the correct part of the brain, but even he acknowledged, like, I'm going to think that this is the bit of your brain. Like, so he knows it's not actually what's happening, but for a revenge to go that deep, for a character to be that driven, it's my single favorite moment with the character. It's one of my favorite moments in the entire Boys comic is Butcher finally getting his revenge, and to get it and squeezing I can't, you almost have to go look at the image and the way Robertson drew it to really feel it. But I mean, of course, who can't identify with the idea of getting revenge for a loved one taken from us too soon through horrible choices made by others? Now, there's a big difference between Billy Butcher in the comics and in the show, and that big difference is superpowers. Of course, in the comics, the boys are all shot up with V. They are, I guess, for versus fans that aren't familiar with the boys, V is how everybody gets superpowers within the boys universe. And in the comics, the boys are this group of people led by Billy Butcher who, when Soups get out of line, they give him a spanking. Uh, and they themselves, while they have superpowers, they're not like superpowered in the same way that Homelander, the universe of Superman is. So they still have to be kind of careful in how they engage with these other superpowered beings, because while they themselves are really tough, they take major hits, heal fast, punch through things. They're not indestructible, and there are more powerful superheroes out there. In the show, none of them have superpowers. In the spoilers again for the show, in the first two seasons. Now, in season 3, they introduced the concept of temporary V, which, to take a step away from Billy Butcher for a second, the idea of a plot twist that represents temporary V that pumps a character up, or maybe you have to roll a die to see what kind of superpowers they get. So in the show, temporary V, anybody who shoots it could manifest in different ways. So Huey, for instance, when he takes it, he's able to teleport. Butcher, when he takes it, he becomes super strong, can shoot lasers from his eyes, go toe to toe with Homelander, although it's not clear that he would be able to win that conflict without some help. So maybe it's like a plot twist where you roll a die, and on this result, you get a 6+1 counters. On this result, you get in flight range and whatever. Something to that effect. Or it could be like an equipment where you pay a blue and get a whole host of special powers. I don't know how they incorporate that, but more importantly, if they are using content from the show up through season 3, then we could expect to see a Billy Butcher with superpowers. So what would these different characters look like? So I think what I would prefer to see is no superpower Billy Butcher as a main character, and then superpower Billy Butcher as like the top and like the 7 or the 8 drop for the boys team affiliation. And that way we could get a little bit of both. So maybe the 8 drop Billy Butcher is like a 18/18 with range and a superpower that lets him, I don't know, heal a wound or something like that. Like, I'm thinking like Namor level uh, type of high drop, and we could get some cool art where he's like shooting lasers out of his eyes. Like, that could all be a cool way to incorporate the season 3 stuff. Now, we do have reason to believe that the boys, I cannot remember the source, and there was too much going on over the weekend of Gen Con, but I swear somebody said that this was meant to be the 2022 release, so this will include content all the way up through season 3. So again, while it's more important to me to see like the typical Butcher that we've seen throughout the first 2 episodes of the show, or 2 seasons of the show, if this does go all the way up through season 3, I'd like to see the superpowered version of him incorporated either as like a high drop character, or maybe there's like a reasonable version, like a 6 or like a 5 or a 6 drop Butcher, but when equipped with Compound V, he gets all these crazy bonuses. So kind of like the way like Magic works, where she's meh on her own, but then she gets like her sword when she gets wounded, and she's able to be above grade. So something like that would be really cool. But let's wheel it back to Billy Butcher, the character. So he is a combat veteran. He was special forces for what do the British call their special? The SAS, I think that's like the British equivalent of the SEAL. I don't know anything about this stuff. I shouldn't be trying to come up with it, but I believe the SAS is the British equivalent of like the SEALs, to put it into an American context. And through that, he has mastery of both hand-to-hand combat, but also like he can fight with knives. He's good with guns. He's an expert marksman. I, it's hard for me to separate how much of this I know from the comics and how much of this I distinctly remember from the show. Like, I'm trying to think of a time. Okay, there is the time in the show where he's got a sniper rifle trained on Starlight. I think it's like at the end of season 2, maybe. So either way, all these things are represented, but it's not just that. Like, yes, Butcher is a tough guy who can fight and is good with weapons, but more than that, he's a tactician. And he's kind of a ruthless, like, Batman without the moral compass kind of tactician, in that not only is he excellent at making plans and strategies to achieve whatever the goal is, but he gets people to play the role that he needs them to through whatever means necessary. So he is not above intimidating, manipulating, using his charisma to obfuscate things, but and not just outsiders, even the boys themselves, even within the team, he manipulates Huey. He plays mother's milk against Frenchie as a way to keep both of them under better control. It he it's hard to talk about this character, and you can't avoid confronting the fact that he's not exactly a good guy. And that is a truth of most of Garth Ennis's work, is there tends to not be very many, if any, good guys. But there are people who are authentic and sincere to their principles in such a way that I think there is something admirable within that. So you look at somebody like Butcher, particularly the way that the comics ended up, and he's manipulating Huey right up until the very end. He's literally lying to him right up until the very end. But at the core of that story, his goal was a world with no Supes. And the thing that Butcher had to confront in the comics is that at the moment he made Huey a superhero, the moment he shot him up with V, it was, according to Butcher's worldview, essentially a death sentence for Huey, because we need a world with no Supes. That's what Butcher needs. And he's motivated by this because of the horrific way that his wife was, if not murdered, like manslaughtered, by one of the. I've said spoilers, but I'm still trying to kind of avoid engaging directly with some of them. Uh, but Butcher's motivation was so pure and so targeted that when he brought Huey into the team, it kind of threw him into some moral confusion. Not throughout the whole story, but it forced him to acknowledge the idea of exceptions, that there could be people with powers who aren't pure evil, who aren't like, I think Butcher's mindset, superpowers are ontological evil. They are you can't square any kind of goodness with having superpowers. By definition, as soon as you're superpowered, you are evil. And he behaves in that way. That's his prime motivation. If you look at all of his choices, they are all kind of filtered through the matrix of, he thinks he's saving the world. He thinks he as messed up and vicious and deplorable and regrettable and just bad as his choices are, his actions are, with the way he treats the people that he's supposed to like care about, like even the boys themselves, his underlying motive is always pushing the ball in the direction of a world without Supes. Because, and it's not just that that is the end all be all, it's because Supes are evil, a world without them would therefore be closer to good. And he's so ruthless in pursuit and just dogged in pursuit of this ideal that when he has to confront the fact that he turned Huey into a Supe, that he's not, it's such a cool moment for the character, because it essentially is his story arc in the comics, is accepting that he isn't always like the idea of exceptions, accepting exceptions, essentially. Now, in the show, we haven't gotten far enough to really see that. And given some of the stuff that happened in season three, I'm not sure that we necessarily will. They've gone different directions with a lot of the characters, but Butcher in particular, I think they can do other things with him instead of having this kind of like one track focus. The introduction of Homelander's child, which by extension Butcher feels some affinity for, some reliant, what's the word I'm looking for? Some responsibility for connection to this kid because it was Becca's child. But even that relationship within season three gets kind of shredded. So they are putting him in the position of having to confront the idea that not everyone with superpowers is bad. And certainly, you might say, oh, well, he used the temporary V. He gave himself superpowers. So does he think he's bad? Of course he does. Like, I think of the operative from the Firefly movie Serenity, where he's talking about a world without sin, and Mal asks him like, "Oh, what? So me and mine have to lay down and die so you can live in your perfect world?" And the operative laughs. He goes, "I won't live in it. There would be no place for me there. I'm a monster." That's, I think, what Billy Butcher thinks of himself. He's a monster, and he's okay with it because he knows he's doing monstrous things for the right motivation. So this turned into way more of a treatise on like the character of Billy Butcher than I kind of intended it to. I wanted to talk more about game mechanics and verses, but these are the things I think really need to come together with the character. And I do this long preamble because I want to see some yellow superpowers on this guy. I want to see like a superpower that's like outwit. Billy Butcher gets to, I don't know, look at the top card of an opponent's deck, or force them to reveal their hand and he can manipulate the hand in some way. I think, yes, he's a tough guy. Yes, he's a brute in a lot of ways, a brawler, but he's so clever. And that's such an important part of who his character is and what kind of separates him from somebody like Frenchie. Well, even that's not fair because Frenchie is incredibly clever in his own way in finding new ways to kill things. Uh, but his level, they talk about Tony Stark not having any superpowers, right? But then there was an era in Marvel Comics where they kind of like, well, he's so smart that his intelligence is kind of like a superpower. They've done this with Batman before too. And I think Billy Butcher, if anybody is going to have the superpower of being the smartest guy in the room, I think Billy Butcher is a fair candidate for such an accolade. So, in addition to him having like good stats at level 1 and 2, I think he should be able to get in there and fight for sure. Uh, maybe more offense than defense. He is a character who very much is like, you don't have to win. As long as you rob the winner of his victory, you're okay. So he's got that kind of attitude too. So maybe an aggressively statted character at level 1, like something like a 5/3. So he can really get in there and hit, but the 3 kind of represents that he is a human. But again, I want some kind of yellow intellect based power, some kind of sneaky something or another that he can do that represents the character being more than just a scrapper. Now, as far as gaining experience, well, what would Billy Butcher within if I'm confining myself to the show, what would cause him to gain experience? Now, if we want to get like really, really literal, it could be something like supporting character representation of Becca or Ryan, Becca's son, or a plot twist that kind of touches on those characters. And you could tie his level up condition to seeing those specific characters. Within the comics, I think you could do kind of the same thing, but tie it to Huey. So, when supporting character named Huey appears on your side, Butcher levels up and that kind of like represents his growth as a character. That might be leaning too far into theme. Now, I know this is verses and like theme overall, sometimes theme smothering all from Super Awesome Games, but that might be a bridge. My love of the boys might be causing a little bit of myopia there on me. And maybe what we want is a Butcher who we're not necessarily trying to tell his story. We're just trying to capture the character. In which case, giving him one of those when you stun an enemy character or KO an enemy character, especially if it was something like when he KOs an enemy character with a superpower or attacks an enemy character with a super. In fact, no, that's what it should be. When Butcher attacks an enemy character with a superpower, he gains experience, which that also kind of ties into his overall like intellect and the scheming that he's always doing. So as he engages in combat with these people who have superpowers, he himself ends up gaining experience from that and becoming stronger. Like that's an excellent theme. So then we get to level 2. And again, I kind of like the idea of keeping the main character Butcher as just Butcher the human that we've seen for the first couple seasons and not doing the this is V'd up Butcher, but we could definitely do this is V'd up Butcher at level 2 and have him gain range and his laser eyes, and maybe he gains some kind of like toughness or durability that would let him, well, not tough specifically as a power. I don't think you necessarily want to flip your main character face up, but like the durability keyword to avoid wounds or a big bump in his defense value. So maybe he's like a 5-3 at level 1, but an 8-8 at level 2, like something like this, if we were going to go the route of the V'd up Butcher. Now, I personally would like to see him still be the scheming, scrappy, has to pull a bunch of tricks and use manipulation to get one over on the villains. But I mean, at its core, Versus is a smash things up game. So as long as there's some kind of representation on the character, whether it's through an intellect based superpower that lets you maybe get intel on the opposing character, or it's through his experience condition. I want something that makes Billy Butcher more than just a turn right and smash dudes card, but he kind of has to be a turn right and smash dudes card too. So these are the kind of, this is the tapestry of thoughts that are going through my head just based on this one character. And the boys themselves, we've got Huey, we've got Mother's Milk, we've got Kamiko, we've got Frenchie. Each one of those characters has a massive depth of storytelling and cool nuances that I think could be translated into verses. I don't know if I'm going to do a whole episode on every single character. Butcher, of course, holds a very special place in my heart. Um, the, the idea of being like so impressed with somebody who could go like get revenge in such a specific and exacting fashion for the harming of his loved one. I mean, clearly there's an appeal in that power fantasy there, without a doubt. Uh, Overall, I I want Butcher to be playable. Like I don't want him to end up like Thing from Fantastic Four, where his level up condition is really so hard that it might ultimately end up making the card just like straight up unplayable. I don't want him to have kind of like a powers that force you to jump through too many hoops. While I did talk about how it would be cool for him to have a level up condition that required the recruiting of a specific character, the more I kind of chew on that, while thematically I still contend that would be very thematically flavorful for the character, I think mechanically I want a Billy Butcher that anybody can sleeve up and just get in there and, well, as they would say in The Boys, give him a spanking. All right, till next time, go win some games.